On January 15th, 2019, just a couple days from now, in the past from now, Nvidia released a driver update, which enabled Nvidia GSync support with 12 validated FreeSync and adaptive sync monitors that don't actually have the G-Sync modules, and then allow you, the user, to enable it for non-validated monitors. So pretty much if you have a FreeSync monitor and an Nvidia graphics card, you can enable G-Sync on that monitor with varying results. They have tested over 400 monitors so far, and only 12 have matched their validation credentials. Now, the assumption on the internet has been, well, they just have some crazy absurd validation requirements, and that you can enable it on anything and it will work fine. And to a degree, that is true. But while I did cover the announcement at CES when they announced that this support was coming, I also just recently reviewed the Viotek, I called it a Viotek, the brand company name is Viotek GN32DR monitor, which has FreeSync support, my first in-house FreeSync monitor, and I wanted to test this compatibility because I was like, hey, I'll get a free upgrade for something that I otherwise can't really utilize. And it's not 100% stable or well working, and there's not a whole lot of videos of that happening on YouTube just yet. So I wanted to cover this kind of alternate perspective of what actually happens when your non-validated monitor isn't working quite right. There's some little quirks here that we are going to explore. Now again, your mileage may vary, there's a lot that goes into it, and your monitor could totally work fine, and for a video of something like that, which does a lot more testing of that kind of scenario, I'm going to point you to a video from Digital Foundry where their main guy, Richard Ledbetter, who stole my video title, thank you.
Hell has frozen over. The end of days are upon us.
Hell has frozen over.
Did a test with a non-validated monitor, but it was a 4K 61, and they kept frame rates between like the mid 40s to the 60 range, and it was mostly stable and very nice. And that kind of showed up as I was doing my testing for this stuff, and so I want to point you to that for more of the right, it's working the right way scenario, best case scenario, and I want to point you more towards it not working right in kind of a different situation. Now this monitor does have a FreeSync range of 48 to 144 Hertz. That will play into, where your frame rate can lie, that FreeSync will actually be utilized, and then in order to actually use it, you will need to go to your Nvidia control panel with the latest update, and go to, there will be an actual G-Sync listing in your control panel now. Enable G-Sync, G-Sync compatible, and then down towards the bottom you select your display that has FreeSync, hit Enable G-Sync for this display since it's not compatible, hit apply, and make sure that FreeSync is turned on in your monitor's OSD settings, of course. And then enable V-Sync in your game, because that's how a lot of it works, is it V-Syncs to the G-Sync, which adaptive syncs, and there's other explanations you can look forward to that, but let's jump to testing right after this.
Plex is the media streaming app that beautifully organizes your media collections and lets you securely access them on all your screens, now with live TV viewing and DVR. Click the link in the video description to learn more. So before I get too crazy into this, I did want to kind of put a disclaimer on this that my general overall gaming experience with this G-Sync setup enabled was fairly smooth, and throughout the entire process I never once noticed any screen tearing, which is partially the goal. So I wanted to get that out of the way, is that when it was working, it worked amazingly, but this is still definitely an example of why certain monitors aren't validated and what the experience will be like until it's improved or until you switch to a validated or better performing monitor. My first experience with this FreeSync setup was when I was just clearing out and claiming the Living Story mission in Guild Wars 2, and I didn't think anything of it at first, but every time I moused over the menu options, like the close button and the search bar and different things in like my inventory menu, my entire cursor would just hang and frame rate would drop to like the 30s or just like 1 frame per second for a moment and just like totally hitch like crazy. And this was only ever with G-Sync enabled, and it was only at 144 Hertz. It's like it was, for whatever reason, even though this didn't happen with FreeSync or G-Sync off and didn't happen at 120 Hertz, with 144 Hertz on this monitor with G-Sync enabled, moving the mouse over that, like there was such a significant frame rate change for some reason that it just like totally hitched and froze and lagged, and It was a very sluggish and confusing experience, and I have no clue why this is happening. And, in fact, most of the issues that I did have were at least somewhat alleviated by switching to 120 hertz in general instead of 144, even though Viotek claims this monitor has a FreeSync range of 48 to 144. Another issue that I noticed was specifically in Call of Duty Black Ops 4, and then I noticed it later in Guild Wars and Warframe and other games, loading screens, or anything that seems to just kind of sit at a locked 60 FPS for some reason, which is all of the lobbies and loading screens and menus in Black Ops 4, some loading screens and menus in Warframe, the loading screens in Guild Wars 2, things like that. There would be a lot of backlight flicker, as if it was like working too hard to try to like drop it to the 60 to 62 frames per second that the game was locking itself to. It's very hard to capture on camera, but you just get a whole lot of like, it looks like the backlight is just flickering. But this only happens with G-Sync on and only in these specific situations, so I'm not really sure what's up there. Playing games like Warframe, which I didn't expect, but having upgraded to the RTX 2080, I am able to maintain a completely solid 144 Hz, 144 FPS apparently, whereas previously I could maintain 120 FPS, but not 144 on my 1080. When you're not having significant frame changes, you have no tearing. Warframe can be pretty prone to tearing with how fast it runs. It ran very smooth, and I had no major issues with Warframe whatsoever. During normal gameplay, I never really had any issues with Guild Wars whatsoever. And most of the time in Call of Duty Black Ops, or Black Ops 4, I never really had any major issues. But there were still some instances of hitching and jitter in some of the games. And this was specifically, I could notice spikes in the frame time graph when you started getting just like towards the 70s and 90s. At 144 down to like 90 FPS, everything seemed to run buttery smooth. Everything seemed to be consistent most of the time. But it did seem like, I'm wanting to say that these were issues caused by like texture streaming or texture loading or something like that, where normally you'd see a hitch in a game when it's loading new map data. Something like that, like when I went to enough to load a new chunk in Guild Wars 2, it happened once or twice. It's like when it starts loading something, you'd normally get kind of a hitch anyway. I'd start getting hitching that is a lower frame rate that this FreeSync stuff does not resolve. And I don't know if it's supposed to, given that it could theoretically be not directly related to just like raw rendering performance on the graphics card. That being said, there were still some occasional hiccups and hitches in Black Ops and in PUBG when I was playing, but 90% of the time was spent with it running smoothly and nice. I had to really, PUBG has apparently updated quite nicely, so I had to really crank up the settings, but cranking it up, I was able to get it at like full 1440p, everything on max ultra settings, and start running it at like 90 FPS or whatever. And it felt fine. Like I've specifically started lowering my refresh rate to say like 120 hertz on monitors whenever my games can't hit the refresh rate that I'm hitting because it was a smoother experience. This including Black Ops 4. On my GTX 1080, I was unable to maintain a locked 144 FPS, and it was a smoother, more nice feeling experience to run it at 120 hertz. This is no longer the case. For most of my gameplay, if I enable G-Sync with this FreeSync monitor, I am able to run it at 144 hertz, and it feels just as good as it did in 120 hertz, which is fairly significant and pretty nice. And the same applies to PUBG. I was able to crank up the resolution and settings and keep it all on max and running in like the 90s sometimes, and it was still running really smoothly. So, like I said, it can work and it can be a game changer, but when it doesn't work, there is some very bizarre issues. And ever since enabling the 4.17 driver update or whatever, my Modern Warfare 2 modded client, IW4X, just refuses to launch anymore. I don't know what's going on with that. And I've had some other issues with some games where some weird stuff happens. Oh yeah, with FreeSync enabled, there is an issue where every once in a while in a couple games, my desktop cursor would start coming through the game. Like the cursor, even the in-game cursor and my desktop cursor would just kind of start showing up out of nowhere in some games. I have no idea what's up with that, but that was only something I could replicate with G-Sync enabled. And it was more agitated if I had my games and my desktop at different refresh rates. So since I was switching back and forth, you know, my desktop might be set to 120 hertz, but my game was set to 144, and that would further agitate this issue and cause the cursor to pop up more often. That was really weird. I don't know what's up with that or why that's happening. And I did not try switching it for this specific issue, I did not try switching it to enabling G-Sync for windowed and full screen, only full screen. So maybe windowed and full screen would fix it so the desktop and the game are more in sync. I don't really know. And then I did notice that if you leave the Nvidia control panel up with the G-Sync menu, it'll just like keep refreshing like the status of the monitor. It'll just like keep reloading it over and over. So that can cause some issues if you have that up while you're in game. And I also had this really weird issue where when I turned off G-Sync in the Nvidia control panel and then turned off FreeSync in the monitor itself, it just like whited or grayed out after it came back and was completely unresponsive. I couldn't change any menu settings and had to completely power cycle the monitor, at which point it worked fine, but that was really bizarre. Yeah, overall this was pretty fun to test. It was really nice. It's one of those things that when you're playing and you're not specifically looking for it, you're just kind of playing and waiting for something bad to happen, you don't actually notice it working, and that's how it's supposed to be. You toggle on G-Sync, you toggle on V-Sync, and your game just runs smooth, and you never have to notice it. And so that made it a little more difficult when I was actually getting into the game to like not realize that it's actually doing work. But once I was like focusing on it and things like that and realizing what the experience I was having compared to what I had before, when it's working, it runs really smoothly. There's just some weird issues. And perhaps in future driver updates, even with my non-validated monitor, this could improve. They could improve the compatibility. I assume they're going to keep working on it and working with the monitor manufacturers and things like that. So I'm excited for this new future of adaptive sync. It still doesn't work with capture cards. There's still always going to be issues with that. And I don't think it's entirely necessary because I was still happy for the most part running things at 120 hertz, especially since that makes it easier to line up with my camera recordings when it's in the background of a camera shot. Anyway, but yeah, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe for more tech education. If you missed it, go check out my video on the announcement of Nvidia supporting FreeSync so you can get more details on that and see the monitor list and things like that. Go check out my review of this Viotek GN32DR monitor. I had a lot of fun with that review, and I just recently posted a video on the best possible recording quality you can get in OBS Studio. Go check that out as well. I'm EposVox, and I will see you in the next one.